you if you've got any other questions or comments. So we'll go ahead and start. It is 2 o'clock, and so again, I'll welcome everybody. And thank you so much for our presenters today to talking about this really important topic. And it's one of those things where you don't think it's that important, but it actually kind of is. And our presenters are going to talk about that a little bit more. So I'm going to kick it off to Michelle to go through the agenda, and I will click off video. Go ahead.
All right. Thanks, Gretchen. Yes, and welcome everyone to our bonus May Alive Academy webinar. I'm so pleased you could join us today for our topic on engaging elected officials to promote volunteerism. So a brief overview for today. A few housekeeping notes to be aware of is that as you call in, you have audio options, either to do audio through your computer or to call in with your phone. So our recommendation is if you're having trouble hearing, to just go ahead and try to dial in with your phone to be able to hear a little bit more clearly. Additionally, if you have any issues with tech as we're going, please drop a note in the chat box and we'll try to assist you on those. A few quick housekeeping things additionally is that if you have questions throughout, please feel free to type those into the chat box and we'll be keeping an eye on those. And I know that Emily and Tom will be happy to answer your questions as well. And so, yeah, today I'm so pleased to have two of my favorite associations together to host this webinar, both Alive and America's Service Commissions, or ASK. And this is really such an important topic. And we had originally hoped that we would be able to do this as a kickoff for those of you who might be going to DC for the Points of Light conference, as a way to help you prepare to actually take advantage of the opportunity to meet with your federal delegation from your state in person. Obviously, things have changed. However, the topic of engaging your elected officials really is evergreen, and you know, I think just as timely today as any time to continue to connect with them. And so, with that, I'm happy to turn things over to the expert hands of Emily Steinberg and Tom Brannon, who are both with America's Service Commissions, to share their presentation. So, thank you both and welcome.
Great. Well, thanks for having us. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you good.
Okay, great. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today to talk about engaging elected officials to promote volunteerism. We love getting to work with Gretchen and Michelle and the Alive community to talk about the intersection of national service and community service and how we can work together to promote our shared goals. I'm going to kick us off in just a minute to talk about why educating elected officials matters. But first, just so you get to know me, I'm the Director of External Affairs with America's Service Commissions, and I'm joined by my colleague, Tom Brannon, our Chief Policy Officer, who's based in Washington, D.C. and leads our public policy efforts. If you could, it would be helpful today if you could use the chat box to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about who you are, what organization you're with, what city or state you're located in. And if you can, what do you hope to learn or gain from today's webinar? You might already be engaged in advocacy or educating elected officials already, or you might be brand new to it and just wanting a basic foundation. So it would be helpful for us to kind of tailor our comments if you could tell us a little bit more about yourselves in the chat box today. So what do you hope to learn or gain? So you may not be familiar with America's Service Commissions, so I just wanted to take a moment to back up and explain who we are and what we're doing here. You'll notice that we're kind of talking about ourselves as America's Service Commissions, but also the States for Service Coalition, and there's a reason for that. So ASK, as we call ourselves, we are a national association. We're nonpartisan and nonprofit, and we are the association of the 52 state service commissions across the United States who administer volunteer and service funding primarily through the AmeriCorps grant program, but also many states also administer something called the Volunteer Generation Fund, or VGF, which helps build volunteer management capacity and helps networks like yours improve their capacity to leverage volunteers. So that's a little bit about us, and part of our work is also advocacy and public policy, which of course Tom leads in Washington, and I support those efforts with Tom. But we have created something called the States for Service Public Policy Coalition, which is basically a privately funded arm of ours that allows us to do this work without using any federal dues or federal funding. So if you're interested in learning more, please do go to statesforservice.org and check out information on joining as a member of our coalition. So a quick look at what we're going to talk about today. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about why it all matters. We're going to talk about what's happening right now and some pending legislation you should be aware of related to national and community service. We'll then talk about how to set your specific advocacy goals and how to think about those, how to get started, and Tom's going to share his top 10 tips for having effective engagement of elected officials and effective meetings, and then how to keep the momentum going. And we'll end with questions and answers. So I know, as Michelle mentioned, we had originally envisioned this as sharing information to prepare for actual Hill meetings in Washington, D.C. Obviously, that's not possible right now. So we're going to do our best to tailor this to how you can start engaging virtually, but also eventually come up with a plan for engaging with in-person meetings, whether locally in your district or in Washington, D.C. All right, so let's just talk about why it all matters. One thing that Tom and I like to always say is that it is not a nice thing to do this. It is your responsibility to advocate for your needs and to advocate for your sector and to advocate for your organization, especially if you're receiving funding from anybody else. And in particular, if you are receiving, federal funds, state funds, other funds that are public funds, those are taxpayer dollars. And it's your responsibility to report back to the American people through your elected representatives what you're doing with those dollars, just like you would for a private funder. So it's actually not a nice thing, it's a responsibility. You're also basically the subject matter experts. So by providing this information to members of Congress and elected officials, you're actually helping them. So they don't really know the numbers, they don't really know the impact, they don't really know who you are or what you're doing. It's your job to basically be that subject matter expert for them and be that person that they want to call when they have to make a tough decision or think about a new policy that they might be implementing, and they might need to call on you as that person, that witness or expert to talk about how this might impact you or your sector. So it really does matter. And there's a lot of good things about it that are in it for you too. So it's not just a responsibility with a heavy burden. It's actually something that, first of all, I think is incredibly fun, incredibly empowering, but it's also good for your organization and your programs. So it brings you visibility and awareness with important elected, officials. It can bring you influence and prestige as well, so that, you are more well known and you have those connections when you need them. It's also great for just your general relationship building. So to get connected to other, major groups, other, national efforts, it kind of plugs you into a much bigger picture of things. And of course, it can also potentially, if you advocate, well, you could increase your funding for your sector or your mission or your organization, or actually influence policies that could help you do your work better. And it can protect you. Sometimes, as you know, there are bad things that happen. There's something called sequestration. There are federal cuts. There are shortages. There are shortfalls. So it's important to have these relationships to protect yourselves from future threats. And it also just provides you more support and representation. You're really taking advantage of the representation that is your right as an American citizen and taxpayer. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Tom Brannon, who's going to give you some updates from the Hill. Tom?
Thanks, Emily, and thank you, Gretchen and Michelle, for having us on today, and thank you all for participating. Really great to be a part of this. Just quickly, I will tell you, I started off as a VISTA volunteer in 1992, and I ended up working for the Corporation for National Community Service for over 10 years. And my first job with the corporation was a VISTA recruitment and placement officer. So basically did a lot of, working with mostly college students, sharing the role of AmeriCorps and National Service and VISTA, and then, led to other positions at the corporation. But I've been sort of advocating for about 15 years with ASK, and sometimes I didn't know a job like this existed. So I didn't start off thinking I'd be in this role, but I think of going back to when I was a recruiter in many ways, just talking about the program and the possibilities. And I just wanted to give you that sense of when we're talking about advocacy, it's about whether you're advocating to a federal official or to a newspaper editorial board or to your state legislature or to a foundation. All those things are sort of like telling your story and sharing that vision with them and trying to get them on board with it. So I just wanted to just kind of give you that angle. There's no, I mean, I guess there's some skill to it, but you know, sometimes just one person offered that, you know, just being authentic and having that expertise about your program conveys. So I did want to talk with you about some really exciting stuff that's happening right now. We are on the verge of perhaps having one of the largest expansions for service in our nation. Unfortunately, it's timed with the experience that we're all going through during this COVID-19 crisis. But there is a piece of legislation that I think they're looking to include in perhaps an emergency supplemental bill that is working its way through Congress. And it's called the Pandemic Response and Opportunity Through National Service Act. It's there's a bill both in the House and the Senate. The House bill has fantastic bipartisan support, and I know the Senate is working to get some strong bipartisan support as well. The bill on the Senate side has been led by Senator Coons from Delaware, and on the House side, it's being led by Representatives Matsui, Price, and Houlihan. It would expand AmeriCorps to 750,000 AmeriCorps members or volunteers over the next 3 years. And 300,000 of them would go for public health sort of service opportunities. The emphasis would be on public health services, emergency logistics, workforce and reemployment services, education support, and services that combat nutrition insecurity. And also, I think there's another part of this bill that I think might be of interest to all of you. It also invites participation by a diverse range of Americans by launching an awareness and outreach campaign on response and service opportunities and supporting the Volunteer Generation Fund, which Emily had mentioned earlier. And the Volunteer Generation Fund right now is a grant that at least 16 or 17 state commissions now receive that supports volunteer infrastructure in their states. And it's about $6.4 million at this point. This would expand it to $50 million over the course of 3 years. So a pretty dramatic expansion there. So there's some really, perhaps some great opportunities for volunteer infrastructure and volunteer generation in this bill as well. And here's a graphic to learn more about this pandemic response and opportunity through National Service Act. I will highlight that there's been a tremendous amount of outreach and support around this bill. In fact, you may have seen that David Brooks from the New York Times, Senator Coons and Senator Cassidy from Louisiana wrote an op-ed in CNN.com. There's also been a number of other op-eds and editorials. In fact, the New York Times published all the letters, a number of the letters that they received in response to David Brooks' call for national service, for an expansion of national service. So it has gotten a lot of attention, and also Senator Coons has been on a number of interview shows and on CNN, MSNBC, and some others, and has highlighted this legislation. So it has certainly been obviously been getting a little bit more attention than some of our previous national service bills. And we're looking at some other legislation too that might be of interest to you. Specifically, I think the Work Now Act of 2020 is a bill to help charitable nonprofit organizations provide services to meet the increasing demand and community needs caused by the pandemic, preserve and create jobs in the nonprofit sector, reduce unemployment, and promote economic recovery. One thing of note, we also, the Corporation for National Community Service, which sort of is the federal partner for for AmeriCorps, is in the Volunteer Generation Fund. It also is authorized to have a program called the Nonprofit Capacity Building Fund. And so America's service commissions and our in our sort of advocacy wing, States for Service, has been advocating for a $1 billion investment in the nonprofit capacity building fund. And what that would provide is to the state commissions to then partner with their nonprofit intermediaries in their state to support capacity for small and medium-sized nonprofits. So that has been one of our while it's not in the pandemic bill, we are working with some of these other pieces of legislation to consider including the nonprofit capacity building fund. We really feel like that would provide cash resources, especially to those organizations that are really truly on the front lines of this pandemic. There's also the Inspire to Serve Act, which is a companion legislation to the National Commission on Military and National Public Service that was commissioned by Congress to look at service opportunities in the United States. And so they have a companion bill. There's also the Unite Act of 2020 that is also sort of another national service bill that would actually it is looking at providing 500,000 AmeriCorps members. And then Health Force and Resilience Force Act, led by Senators Gillibrand and also Bennett of Colorado, providing for the establishment of a health force and resilience force to respond to public health emergencies and meet public health needs. So there's a lot of legislation that's focused on service opportunities. I will say that the Senator Coons bill that I had mentioned earlier seems to be the vehicle for us right now. It has the sort of the momentum going for it, and we are working night and day to support that. In fact, we're working very closely with the National Governors Association and others to really try and get that included in the next round of emergency supplementals. So I'm going to pass it back to Emily to talk a little bit about setting your advocacy goals.
Great, thanks, Tom. So I know that many of you mentioned in your comments in the chat box that you're trying to figure out, I think, what these goals are, and then how to clearly communicate with elected officials to promote volunteerism and volunteer engagement. So I think that fits really well with this section. So just to kind of lay a quick foundation on how to think about your goals. The one important point we like to always make, particularly with our groups, because many of our commissions, well, actually all of our commissions receive federal funding, is that there is a difference between what we call educating versus lobbying. And they really are legally two different things. And so it may not matter to you. You may have a lot of freedom and flexibility in terms of what, lobbying, but many of our commissions and nonprofits do not if you receive federal funding. So I did want to quickly make this point. The educating is basically the most basic form of advocacy. It is providing just factual information about who you are and what you're doing and the impact that you're having, or inviting someone to learn more about you. So one example of this is, how many clients you serve, how many volunteers you're mobilizing or engaging, what needs you're addressing, what geographic area that you're in, or inviting an elected official to come visit you to learn more, or attend one of your events to learn more. That is something that is always allowable, even if you do have federal grant funds and you're using the federal time to do this. Educating is always allowable. Federal agencies themselves do educate elected officials. It is kind of your civic duty, basically, to educate. But if you are able to take it a step further, that is what we call lobbying. And lobbying is essentially asking for things. You might be asking for funding or money. You might be asking for someone's vote or endorsement, or asking for some sort of favor, or campaign, endorsement type of thing. So some examples of that, are to please vote yes or no on a certain bill, to ask for increased funding for a program such as Volunteer Generation Fund, or to ask someone to co-sponsor or endorse a bill. And that is something, just so you know, if you do charge time to a federal grant, you cannot do lobbying while charging time to federal funds. However, you can do it while not charging time to federal funds and charging it to private funding, or doing it on your own volunteer time, or doing it as a private citizen. You absolutely have the right as a private citizen to engage with and lobby on things that matter to you. So the other important thing to think about as you begin, setting your goals is, what are your ultimate desired outcomes here? And there is a whole range. And typically, I'm starting at the most basic thing here, which would be to just establish a relationship with the policymaker in question, just to get to know them, to introduce yourself, to get to know them and their priorities. At the most basic level, that's something that all of you should do with your elected officials. Kind of moving further down, the next thing would be to educate and raise awareness about your impact and geographic location, so that policymaker has a working understanding. They may not have it memorized, but they've got your folder handy, they know your website, they know your name, and they really understand that you're having an impact and where you're having it. And then, getting further along, you also, I think, might have an outcome of wanting to express your concerns, issues, or needs. Perhaps there is a federal policy or state policy that's impacting you in a way that you don't like, or there's legislation that might pass that might have a negative impact on you. You can express those concerns and needs to them. You may also want to just be sharing your recommendations with them. So I know, for instance, for States for Service, we have a standing one-pager that we update every year, showing here's our recommended funding requests for each of the specific national and community service programs that are funded through federal dollars, and here's what we recommend you do with each program. So we write it all up for them, and we make it easy so that they can keep that one-pager handy and know what our recommendations are. You also might just want to be strengthening an existing relationship, who can, taking somebody from being an acquaintance as a policymaker to being more of a champion or an ally. Another thing you might want to do is to neutralize someone who actually is actively opposing you or is causing you problems. So there are definitely policymakers who may not like your organization, may not like your program, or may have a misconceived idea about it. That definitely happens with AmeriCorps and National Service, where there are just incorrect assumptions about what we're doing. So you might want to neutralize them. And I think Tom's going to talk about that in his top tips as well, but that actually can be a very powerful thing to at least get your enemies to be quiet. You also might be testifying or responding to a request for information. That does happen from time to time, particularly at the state level. Many field experts end up having to go to the state legislature. I'm pretty sure Michelle and her colleagues have done this, where you are testifying on a specific bill that might impact your sector. And then, as I mentioned before, you might be inviting them to come join you for a special event. Could be a roundtable, open house, gala, other special event. If you have any other desired outcomes, please let us know in the chat box. That will be really interesting to hear. The next important thing as you set your goals is to think about, who are you targeting? So it may not make sense to go, focus on the federal aspect if you aren't receiving any federal funding, or if there aren't any federal policies that are currently impacting you. You may want to start local, or even look at state decision makers and policymakers. So you have to kind of figure out, depending on what your goal is and what's most important to you and your organization, who do you want to target? So for instance, locally, you might be targeting city council or your mayor or county commissioners. You might be asking for things like proclamations, local recognition, giving testimony at a city council meeting, participating in a citywide event, securing city or county funding. So that's just one example there. And then at the state level, you'd be looking at trying to influence or build a relationship with the governor, lieutenant governor, state legislature, state agency heads potentially. And that might include things like looking at state legislation, partnering on statewide events or initiatives, or securing state funding. And then at the federal level, which is, we're really going to talk a little bit more about that, is focusing on members of Congress. So those are your US senators and your House of Representatives members who represent you in your federal delegation. But it could also be influencing the White House and presidential appointees, or federal agencies. So that might include things like lobbying or advocating for federal appropriations, specific legislation, federal partnerships, or national events and recognition. So kind of be thinking about that. Where might it make sense for you to focus potential advocacy efforts moving forward? The next thing is to kind of decide on a strategy as you set your goals. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk about virtual and remote options, since right now that's really mostly the only thing you can probably do. safely right now. These are bizarre times. I will say though that, and I know Tom would agree with me, in-person meetings are always the most powerful. And so if and when those are available again to us in the future, once we get through this pandemic, we definitely want to encourage you all to think about some in-person strategies down the road. But right now, ways that you can engage virtually include, doing email campaigns where you're getting a group of people to send, a common or similar email with the same talking points and messaging and requests. Phone call campaigns where you're basically doing the exact same thing, but you have a group of people who are making phone calls to their U.S. senator, I guess, whoever you're targeting, potentially your senators and members of Congress. You also might just be doing personalized outreach. So that could just be individual emails to key policymakers, but it does take, usually having that contact info, which usually takes having a basic relationship in place, like who to reach out to personally. And then of course there's snail mail. I've seen commissions, and I've done this too when I worked for a state commission, where we would send letters, grant notification letters saying, hey, we've awarded grants in your district. And we would snail mail those every single year. I've seen some organizations send postcards or even invitations to special events. Just know that snail mail can take a long time, so you definitely want to factor that in. There's a lot of additional screening and security when you're sending snail mail to anybody who's elected, particularly federally. It goes through a very lengthy screening process, so it might take weeks, possibly over a month, to get to them. The other things you can be thinking about are what we call fly-in days or Capitol Hill days, where you would actually bring a group to Washington, D.C. For instance, if we were all at the Points of Light conference next month, that would be a great opportunity to basically do a Capitol Hill day as a group. And it's really fun when you do it as a group too, because you can meet up and see each other in the hallways or meet up in the cafeterias and kind of feel like you're there as a larger group. You can also do district meetings though with your local offices. So many people do not realize that your senators and House members typically have district offices that are regional throughout the state. So usually in the major metropolitan areas or throughout the district that they serve. So you can set up meetings with their local staff, what we call their district staff or district directors. And then, as I mentioned many times, special events. People like a feel-good special event. So if you're having an open house, if you're doing an award ceremony, if you're graduating volunteers or clients, or in our case, AmeriCorps members, or if you're hosting some sort of community roundtable event. That's actually the photo that you see there at the top. That's Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois doing a roundtable. Looks like there's media there with some AmeriCorps members in Illinois. So where you're focused on a specific topic, or you're having them get to know, like in this case, AmeriCorps members, and looking at the impact that they're having in Illinois. So thinking about which of these strategies might make the most sense or be the most feasible realistically for you. And here's an example that I just wanted to share of a virtual campaign. This is actually something that we've been doing pretty much annually through States for Service. And we do this typically in February, around Valentine's Day, leading up to our Capitol Hill Day that we have. So it helps us kind of generate a buzz in advance and after our Capitol Hill Day. And typically it does tend to align with the White House and the president's budget release every year. We have faced some challenges there because for the last 4 years, the White House has basically recommended eliminating all funding for national and community service. And we have had to push back on that for the last 4 years. So this is something that we've just kind of built into our annual work. Last year, or just last month, I guess, a couple months ago, we actually got 550 messages sent to Congress through this campaign, which might not seem like a ton, but it is really when you think about if we didn't do it and there would be zero contacts to Congress. And it was a combination of phone calls, emails, and Twitter. We use a special campaign platform, so it gave our advocates a really easy way to plug in where we basically wrote all the messaging for them. And so when you join Seats for Service, this is something that you would see where we might engage you in certain campaigns like this and ask you to take action. But yeah, it's really nice. And when you do have technology like what we use, again, it can take like 5 to 10 minutes to participate in a campaign. But you can also do it the old-fashioned way, as I said, with snail mail or emails or just individual phone calls too. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Tom to tell you about his top 10 tips and how to get started. Tom?
Thanks, Emily. So I wanted to just give you, I know we're kind of in a different time right now, but we will get back to a place where we'll do in-person visits, and some of this is geared towards that. But I have a former executive director of one of our commissions who used to visit with all his legislative office, sometimes never with really anything other than the share the work that was happening, that they were doing in the state. But he would always say, I'm here because in case there's an emergency, you know me. And so I've been reflecting on the fact that I was talking to a colleague of mine who serves as an advocate for a different industry. And we were just talking about right now how busy the members of Congress, how the staff are really incredibly busy right now because, all the businesses in their districts, all the constituents, so many people are reaching out to them right now because they're either have lost their job, they're worried about keeping their business on board. They're all these different constituency groups and constituents are now just really weighing in, and many of them it's for the first time. Many folks are calling their members of Congress for the first time, and unfortunately, sometimes having that relationship in place. And going back to our colleague there, who, he would be able to call and someone would know who he was because he had done the legwork, he had developed the relationships. And right now, sometimes it's such an important, I just can't stress the importance of that. And legislative office visits certainly help build that relationship. And as Emily said, you don't have to come to Washington, D.C. to have that relationship built. You also have the district and state offices that your members of Congress have. But this also would apply to your state legislators as well, and and to your city council members, county commissioners, things like that. All across government, I would say that all of these sort of tips apply. And again, just to reinforce what the slide says, that building that one-on-one relationship. And frankly, when it comes to the federal level, especially, having that one-on-one relationship with a staff person is key. And I always say, today's intern is tomorrow's chief of staff. So also you want to make sure that, whether you're meeting with an intern or, a senior person, that all of them have influence, and all of them may end up, in different roles that, and the same with your congressional member too. They may not be on a key committee right now, but they may end up on a key committee and actually end up being the chair of that committee. So there's just, building those relationships is just key. And again, having that one-on-one, sort of meeting is really important. So I wanted to walk through some homework with you, or some tips with you. And number one is to do your homework. Kind of plan out your visit, be clear on what you want to achieve out of this conversation, what impact you want to have, and if there's anything you want to ask for, or is the goal to educate. Determine, sort of what is the best thing to bring to them, like sort of what you want to highlight to them. And so, I would recommend always making it relevant. And that's when you want to do your homework on the actual lawmaker themselves. You want to see what they're interested in, what their committee, how they voted, what their background is, what did they do before they came to Congress or before they joined the state legislature. All those things will help inform your conversation with them and can bring it home to them. So you're talking about what they're interested in. And then come prepared. Have your materials you want to leave behind. Make sure you have your business cards. I talk about have the sort of the different leave behind materials, that whether it's your priorities, whether it's an annual report, whether it's whatever it is, but make sure it's what you want them to digest from your organization. And it's always nice to have it organized and packaged in a folder. Tip number 3, be prompt and patient. You know, you always want to leave a good impression. You always want to be your best. Yeah, again, you're trying to build that, ultimately you're trying to build that relationship, and you want to put your best foot forward. So, you know, you always want to arrive early, and allow enough time to get through. I can't tell you how many times I've shown up and there's a big line outside it for security. And luckily, you know, if you've got a big enough of a buffer of time, you won't have to worry about it. But always think it's going to take you longer to get in the building and get to the office. And if you visit Capitol Hill, you'll notice that some of these buildings are kind of challenging to navigate. So you want to give yourself plenty of time. There's also metal detectors. Um, then when you get to the office, it is not uncommon for them to be late. They might be wrapping up a previous meeting. Just make yourself comfortable, and you know, let them know that you're fine waiting, and even if they're have to change, you know, try and reschedule another time. And you know, given especially on the House side, but you know, it can happen on the Senate side, there isn't a lot of office space, and sometimes you have your meetings in the hallway. Sometimes you're actually meeting in the reception area where all the people are waiting, and you're having a conversation in front of the, you know, everyone that's in the office. So again, and then sometimes you get in a conference room, or a lot of times you end up in the member's office themselves too. So but just be prepared that your meeting may not be, you know, sort of, you know, yeah, just be prepared to be, you know, adapting to a different type of space. And most meetings are 15 to 30 minutes long. You know, I always sit with my sit sort of the edge of my seat, so that I don't ever get comfortable. I don't camp out. I kind of want to show them that I'm respecting their time, that I'm going to be, you know, as brief as possible, but give them, you know, great high quality content in the shortest amount of time, and that actually conveys quite well. Be knowledgeable, be yourself. Like, this is one of the most important. As I said earlier, you know, going about, you know, starting off as a recruiter, and just being passionate about what you're talking about, because you know, you're being yourself. If you care about the subject you're talking about, it conveys, and that conveys because you're being yourself. You know, be friendly and personal. Connect. You know, sometimes I'll see if there's a, you know, I remember visiting a sort of challenging lawmaker one time, someone that was not a very big supporter of our work, and noticed that he had baseball memorabilia in the room, and we started chatting a little bit about baseball, had a little common ground. You know, share relevant experiences when appropriate. You know, and if you don't know the answer to something, you don't have to be, they don't expect you to be an expert on everything. And you know, and just admit you don't know, but offer to follow up with them so that you can get them that information after the meeting. And I mean, I would put this as one, you know, if this was any tip, it'd be 1 through 10. This is what you're here to do. I mean, build the relationship. I can't tell you how many things we've been able to do because we've had relationships with members, key members, staff, and by doing all the things we're talking about, by, you know, doing your homework, by having the materials, by making the case, by being yourself, builds that relationship that ultimately could lead to what you're trying to accomplish. And also, it could get things accomplished. It could get a new ally, but sometimes, as Emily said earlier, you might actually be able to, you know, sort of neutralize someone who may be actively working against you. So, you know, no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, is a great saying. And as I said earlier, you know, about being prompt, and, you know, don't stay too long. Keep your, you know, get ready to leave as soon as you get there, basically. But, you know, but you want to be able to convey everything you want to get, you want to say. The last thing you want to do, though, is overstay your welcome, because again, you want to come back. you want to connect with this person again. I can tell you this, a lot of times, I think when we talk about national service, we talk about volunteering, all those folks are constituents. And so I always used to say, that the corporation funds programs for senior citizens and young people. I can't think of a better campaign ad than a congressperson standing with a group of seniors who are doing good things, or a bunch of young people doing good things. I think it's a good reflection. But at the same time, though, you can be an ally to them on terms of policy issues. And so not only offer your assistance, but also say, what are the needs that you've heard what we do. What are things that we do that could be helping the congressperson? What are areas that we could assist you? What are things that could be helpful to you in terms of things that the congressperson is trying to accomplish? So offer to become an expert resource to them as well. Always take advantage of that time you have, whether it's a staff person or with the member, to get a photo, and use social media. Again, they obviously benefit from having you tout, what a great meeting you had with the member, and it's also a way for you to amplify your message as well. And it keeps you connected. So make sure you don't forget to take that photo. And if you can get it with the member, great. If not, get it with the staff. What I usually do, if I'm with a staff person, we try to go out in front of the sign with the member's name on it, the member of Congress's name, and have the staff person and myself photographed with the member's name. So, and they're always happy to take photos with you. So please do that, and then post it on social media. And that's especially helpful when you're doing, those fly-in days. You want to have a lot, then you want to have a hashtag and really amplify the work you're doing. And why use social media to engage? Well, look who's on Facebook. 100% of the House and Senate are on Facebook. And on Twitter, the Senate 100% and 96% of the House members are. So again, everyone's on social media. And so that's an effective tool to, again, get your message across. That relationship piece is so important, and really what helps build that relationship is the follow-up. Sometimes the follow-up can be more important than the actual meeting, because you establish the opportunity to share. A lot of times it's new information to them, and they're not digesting it fully. So the follow-up is really important. So you want to be able to send them a thank you email but provide the materials perhaps that you shared in the meeting, and reference that, and perhaps reinforce your message in the email. Recap the purpose of the meeting and the points covered. Reinforce that your interest is not only your issue, but why it should matter to the lawmakers, district, and constituency. And make sure, very importantly, to be thankful to specific staff who've been really helpful in assisting you. The other thing I do a lot of times too, but I'm based in Washington, is I actually hand deliver personal thank you notes as well, to the staff or to the member when I meet with them. It just adds another touch to that. And I also like to think of a thank you is another way of staying in front of them, which is really important. And this is the most important one. I mean, I keep saying relationships are, but this is actually kind of fun. I mean, you really have a great time. You feel like you're part of, you're doing your civic duty. And you're walking the halls of Congress or the state capitol. You see other people doing it. If there's this sense of history, you feel like you're supporting the work that you're doing, you're elevating the work you're doing. So I just say have fun doing it. Go with a friend if possible. The food at the cafeterias isn't bad either. So it's a great chance to have lunch together and just catch up, and you might be sitting next to a U.S. senator. They ate in the cafeterias too, the members of Congress. So, and I know I've had interns over the years, and they're some of the members of Congress are heroes to them. So they are, blown away that they actually saw that person, in person. So just have fun with it, and know that this is really helpful in helping your organization. And so here's some suggested materials to bring. Bring a Hill Day sign, particularly if you're on a fly-in day. Bring your business cards. Always good, make sure that they have, because they may go, oh, that's that service person. The boss had a question about service. Let me find that card and I'll reach out to that guy. And that's exactly how it goes. Make sure you have a folder that has an organizational one-pager, a list or map showing geographic sites that you may have projects at. Also, always an opportunity to invite them to any events you might have. Again, the member of Congress may not be able to go, but they have those district and those state staff that they might be able to attend, that you want to establish the relationship with them. And then, of course, if you're there asking for something, make sure you have that policy funding request included in the packet. It's key messages. Government cannot do it alone. The nonprofit voluntary sector is essential to meeting our nation's most critical needs. The nonprofit sector is the third largest workforce in the United States and represents 10% of the American workforce. It's 11.4 million jobs. Volunteer and service-based programs are extremely cost-effective. We impact not only those clients we serve, but the volunteers who are serving. And we believe in the importance of federal funding and national community service programs such as AmeriCorps Senior Corps and the Volunteer Generation Fund to invest in our future and allow more Americans to serve. So I'm going to pass it back to Emily, and she's going to share with you how to keep the momentum going.
Great, thanks, Tom. I love your top 10 tips. So we're pretty much going to close it out here, but wanted to let you know that, we encourage you not just to have those initial introductory meetings or, correspondences with your elected officials, but to think about this as a really long-term relationship that you're going to cultivate. Well, potentially long-term, depends on how much they get reelected, I guess, since House members are typically only in office, for 2 year terms, but senators obviously have longer terms. And you do want to think about this as a long-term strategy with them. So of course, as Tom talked about, scheduling those introductory meetings, whether on the Hill or your state capitol or district offices, but also think about ways that, you can find connections to stay in touch with them, or you might know somebody who's worked for them or has something in common with them or serves on a community board or advisory committee with them. Some other fun ways of keeping in touch with them are to send your newsletters and annual reports to them, to their staff, particularly with a personal note. If you have a printed annual report of any kind or printed publications that you're working on, people love getting things like that with a personal note, and they usually are hopefully keeping a folder on you if you already have had a meeting, and they can kind of keep that with your file and information. I also love social media, so I know Tom talked about it for posting while you're there or as a quick thank you that you met with them, but also think about tagging your elected officials on social media when you're posting any kind of exciting news or announcement or press release or highlights. One example of this is right now, we're capturing photos and stories of how state service commissions and AmeriCorps programs and VGF volunteers are responding to COVID-19. And so when I see those, I usually do, retweet them or share them and tag, the U.S. senators for that particular state and their governor or state rep. So I really, really do like to tag them. And sometimes it gets the attention of staff to really look further into whatever that news is that you're sharing. Keep invitations to special events coming to their office. So build this into, if you have an annual event of some kind, or, do something like an award ceremony, or as I said, a fundraising gala or something else, think about, keeping them on your standing invitation list. People like feel good things. And then you can also ask them sometimes to speak or to kind of be part of that event. They particularly love if you ask them to speak. Elected officials just love to be able to give good news. It's free, PR for them. I will say too that when it's a re-election year, they're often much more willing and interested in attending events and connecting with you. So leverage those re-election years to really build the relationships too. And then, just keep following up with them. Every time you have a request, every time you have a concern, like you really do. Tom is really good about this. I mean, I feel like all the Hill staff know him by name because he's always there and he's always following up when something is about to come out or there's a piece of legislation that, could be, is in progress. It's great to kind of keep that standing relationship. Also, thank you notes. So people often, I've heard, members of Congress say they often hear concerns and complaints, but what they don't hear is thank you from a lot of people. So if you can be that person that thanks them for passing a good piece of legislation or voting yes on something that you care about or supporting or giving a quote or endorsement to something that is important to you, write them a thank you note. It can be a thank you email, a thank you snail mail card. It could be a thank you tweet. But folks love to hear thank you, and honestly, members of Congress don't hear thank you enough. And then think about this as like a standing, annual process to at least, if you do nothing else, try to have some kind of annual check-in. For us, I know we plan that February Capitol Hill Day every year, so that's kind of become our annual check-in month. But it may be something else for you. So building that into your regular workload, that's my best piece of advice, is to think about this in terms of your regular annual calendar. What are all the opportunities that your organization might have to invite those elected officials or engage them as part of your regular recurring work? So I cannot recommend that enough. And ideally put somebody in charge of it, or at least unofficially have somebody be your advocacy lead if you don't already have that person. And it might be you. If you're interested in that, people often want volunteers on this. So the last thing I will say to keep the momentum going is that we would love to have you join our coalition if anybody's interested. I know Emily on the call, the other Emily, is already a member, and we're seeing an increase in the number of particularly volunteer generation fund programs and organizations that receive that federal funding want to join. And we really are pretty much the only public policy coalition that fights for VGF funding consistently. And we also are a coalition made up of AmeriCorps programs, Senior Corps programs, VISTA, and other state service programs like AmeriCorps. So we focus on expanding service at the state and local level, and really focus on peer-led efforts. So, we try to have a leader for every state that will help mobilize other folks from that state to take action when we need you to. So if you're interested, we have individual memberships and organizational memberships available. You can learn more at statesforservice.org.
Thanks, Emily. And I do have a question that's come in from Angela Williamson, and she's with the Blood Bank. She said, a colleague said she never gets herself in a photo with an elected official, as it could be seen as she supports them even if she does not. Is that a real concern?
Tom, do you want to address that? I don't think that's a concern to me, but I'm curious what you think, Tom. I mean, I think that's a personal preference.
Again, like I see it as you're engaging your elected official, and regardless of your political affiliation, they still represent your district, and you're there in the capacity of supporting your organization. So I always look at it that way. I don't look at it as sort of a an endorsement of any political cause or candidate or party. And so, again, it is a way to, support the work that you're doing more than really is supporting the member of Congress. And again, I would say it this way, a lot of times, I mentioned earlier, if it's a supporter, if they support the work that you're doing, then it's an opportunity to thank them. If it's a person that you're trying to help turn support your work, then it's a way to further advance that effort. And if it's someone that may be against the work you're doing, you can share, that you are there to, you had a good dialogue and working to further advance our work with that office. So it's also in the way you phrase the tweet or the social media post, to make sure that it's a reflection of the work. And a lot of times too, we have a hashtag around a campaign or a hashtag around, so it's clear that this is not a political endorsement, more of a opportunity to influence or to educate members regarding the actual cause that you're meeting them about. I hope that's helpful.
Great. Any other questions?
And she says, yes, thank you. This is Gretchen. So if you're doing some advocacy work and you're just meeting with people and you're not actually from your district, is there a good way to kind of downplay that piece?
So I meet all the time with members who are not from my district. In fact, I do. That's pretty much my job. And so, I again, and I've actually worked on a Senate campaign years ago, and these are national. They have the work they do impacts national policy, and so if you're meeting with a key member on a committee, things like that, it's helpful to work with them. But that and of course I work for a national organization, but again, a lot of our state commission folks who come in, they may not be from a member's district, but they represent the state commission. So a lot of times, again, I go back to representing the organization and not necessarily being a constituent. It's always great though if you are a constituent, because then you can work that angle into the conversation. But a lot of times, when you're representing the organization, that's the sort of the approach you're taking.
And Tom, you go a lot with a constituent, I know. So like if you're going to meet with, a senator from Maryland, you're going to take somebody ideally from the Maryland Commission with you.
That's right.
You can be kind of the national expert, but they can be the constituent.
That's right. It's always great to bring someone from the state or from the district, but obviously sometimes, we don't. For instance, last year, I had 3 summer interns, and we had a goal of meeting with the 98 new members of Congress, and we made it to 62 offices. So it was just that it was the 4 of us. No one was a constituent, but we were able to sort of put our best face, hopefully, forward with these new members to kind of introduce them to AmeriCorps and Volunteer Generation Fund and national service in those meetings.
Thank you.
Sure.
I'm not seeing any other questions come in, and we're just about at the top of the hour. So Michelle, I will let you wrap it up from here. I'll go ahead and go to the other slides real quick.
Thank you so much to Tom and Emily for sharing today all that great insight and ideas. And I'm sure we'll keep in touch with you. And for all of our live members, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to them or reach out to us if there are other topics related to advocacy and engaging with your elected officials that you'd like to hear, or resources you'd like us to help develop. Let us know, and we'd love to talk more about that. A few exciting things we have coming up. So next month, our next Alive Academy will be on June 19th, and we have Dana Litwin, who is going to be talking about the 3 C's of volunteer management and a 4th C with COVID-19 response. We also just have opportunities to present for Alive Academy for the rest of the year open. So we'd like to invite you, our members, to gain that professional experience of speaking on a national webinar. So if you have a topic that you'd like to present, there's information about being an Alive Academy presenter on our website, or else just feel free to reach out to us and we'd be happy to tell you more about it or talk through your presentation idea. We also always have opportunities to volunteer with Alive. This is your organization, and so we are run on volunteers. So a lot of committee positions open within membership, marketing, programs and advocacy. So there's more information about that in the newsletter. Otherwise, again, just reach out. And a new opportunity that's coming up is a community of practice around transportation. So if you or someone you know works in a volunteer engagement role that deals with transportation, of volunteers transporting people, or things of that sort, and would like to participate and learn more about others who are doing that work specifically, reach out to Kathy Toma or take this survey to share a little bit more about what you'd like from that group. And as always, there's always many more webinars, news, and a lot of other information on our website. So please visit that. Otherwise, thank you so much for all you do. I know now is a challenging time and volunteer engagement professionals are more important than ever. So thank you so much for your work. And we're so appreciative that you took the time to join us. So have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us today, and have a great rest of the week.